Welcome aboard to Those Happy Places, the podcast that treats theme park rides and attractions like literature. I'm Buddy Duquesne.
And I'm Alice White.
And this week, we're going to be discussing the importance of a few key transit systems around Disneyland Park, namely the Disneyland Railroad and the Monorail, two iconic and important pieces of Disney history. Both of these attractions represent a symbolic and thematic focus of Disneyland, which we hope to get to the bottom of by the end of this episode.
But first, hey buddy, do you take public transportation?
Oh yeah, all the time. So as attentive listeners will know, I live in the Bay Area, California, and up here we have something called the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, or BART for short. And you know, it's a combination elevated train / subway system. There's also the Muni in San Francisco, which is the municipal transit system, which is buses and streetcars and that sort of thing. When you think of San Francisco, that's probably the streetcar you're imagining. And I take these all the time whenever I want to go somewhere not home or work, basically. So they're really normal, kind of everyday, average parts of my life. So what about you, Alice?
Well, as attentive listeners may remember, I live in New York City. I actually live in Manhattan, and I don't own a car here. It's so impractical to own a car here. So I'm actually on the subway system here every single day. It is the heartbeat of the city. It keeps this place alive because otherwise the traffic would be it is just so bad. The MTA runs the subway system here. We just call it the subway or the metro. We don't have a fancy name like BART for it. And while it has its flaws, it is for the most part efficient and quick, and makes the city a lot easier to navigate without the trouble of driving around in it. So yeah, I don't remember the last time I had a day that I wasn't on the train.
While you were in New York.
Well, I was in New York.
Right.
Every day. It's a part of our day-to-day routines here, and everybody takes the train here.
Yeah. I guess why did you ask me that question?
Well, I wanted to ask you, not just because we wrote it down, but I wanted to ask you about your personal experience with public transportation, because while I know you nowadays you take the train for you take the train around when you have to, but say growing up we drove everywhere. We grew up in Southern California. We drove everywhere except at Disneyland. We take that train sometimes just for fun.
And I feel like mostly only just for fun.
Right.
I can't. Well, we'll get to this a little later in the episode, but there's something about those trains, the monorail and the railroad specifically, that is way more, and I hesitate to use the word, but magical than your average everyday trip to BART or the Metro. It's BART and the Metro are they're normal, right? They're really mundane. They're these brutalist, concrete, efficient, like just normal trains.
They're not aesthetic in any way.
Yeah,
they're just for efficiency.
Yeah, and they do their job quite well, quite cheaply, environmentally friendly, but they don't bring a lot of charm or a lot of entertainment value or fun. And I can't really remember a time that I got on BART that I was just excited to be on BART, except for maybe the first time that I visited San Francisco. It's not romantic. It's not always clean.
Oh God, no.
No, and I'm sure the same is true of the Metro, right? Where
oh, it's
maybe
disgusting.
for a few weeks after you moved over there, I'm sure that you found that a little romantic. But have you ever gotten on the subway just to ride it around, just to see where you ended up?
No, never. I would never.
That sounds terrible, right? And nor I for BART. I've never gotten on BART and just seen how far I could ride it because I want to be somewhere. I want to go do something on it. It's a tool. And
but at Disneyland, the train is a ride. Even the monorail, which is a transportation system from downtown Disney to the park itself, it's still a ride. It is somehow trying and succeeding to blend efficiency and fun in the same car, in the same system.
Yeah, in the everything from the way that the lighting is, the way that the doors open, the way that the crew is dressed, the way that the stations are presented, everything about them is presented in a way that brings that whimsy and that presentational style. Not to mention the monorail especially. No, the monorail and the train both have these really iconic designs that are much more about style than substance. Though with the monorail, I find that it might actually be like quite a substantive design, right? Kind of this is the future of transportation. Look how streamlined and cool it is.
Sure, and we'll get to the monorail, but I think we should start with the train. I think I want to hear you talk about the Disneyland Limited, and but let's start with the train because it was really the first thing that was ever finished in Disneyland, right?
That's right. The Disneyland Railroad was actually an opening day attraction in 1955, and a lot of people know that. But while I was doing a little research on the subject, I stumbled upon a video by Offhand Disney, a popular YouTuber, who did a video on the attraction. And by the way, Offhand Disney, thank you for giving us permission to quote you as a source. And I learned a little bit more about the park history from that video, and it turns out that the railroad was the first completed ride at Disneyland for a reason. And that's because it was used as a means of transporting materials from one area of the park to the other to build the rest of the rides. So the train was a utility at first, which I found fascinating just as a concept. Like, while you're riding that steam train, that same train was being used to build the park you're looking at.
That's amazing.
And to imagine riding the train perhaps before the park was built, when it was just kind of a loop around nothing. And maybe there was some scaffolding of the castle, and Main Street was being built. And you could kind of imagine with the berm the way it was, that you'd kind of have a bird's eye view as well of what was going on. And historically, the train is very important to Walt himself, because as a child, model trains, electric trains were a big deal for him. He had an uncle that was a conductor. And for as long as Disneyland was an idea, a train was part of it. Even as far back as when it was called Mickey Mouse Park and was just a small little park near his studio that people could kind of come and visit the studio and then visit the park. Even then, he was like, gotta have a train at that. So it really was a huge part of him personally, and a huge part of his personality, I think, that remains injected into the park.
That's right. So today, guests can board the train at any of 4 stations: Main Street, New Orleans Square, Mickey's Toontown, and Tomorrowland Station. And also embark on what is called the Grand Circle Tour of the Magic Kingdom. So you can stay on board and go all the way around, or you can hop off at any of those stops. And when you ride the Grand Circle Tour, you get treated to scenic views of the park, and it tops off with a classic dark ride type display of the Grand Canyon and the primeval world. And that's between the Tomorrowland and Main Street stations. Altogether, the trip takes about 20 minutes, including stops. So if you sit on it, ride all the way around, about 20 minutes.
And it really is an incredible 20 minutes. It kind of gives you a back view of some of the park. And parts of it are kind of notably bland. I would say that between Main Street and New Orleans Square, there really isn't much to look at. It's kind of a tunnel, the back of some buildings, and then eventually the station, which is a pretty cool site. But there's parts where you can see the rivers of America, Tom Sawyer Island, great views of the Matterhorn. You can see inside Splash Mountain. There's a lot to look at while you're on this tour, and there's some narration that goes along with it. So, Alice, I hope you don't mind. Let's kind of move on to the symbology of the steam train.
I don't mind at all. Let's talk about the history of steam trains in America a little bit. Trains were an important part of the development of America as a country from the earliest days of the invention of the train. This continent is so big that in order to settle most of the West, we needed trains. You can't just ride horses from one end of America to the other. It's just too big.
Yeah, you could ride horses, but you need several horses.
You need many
and
horses
a long time.
and weeks on end to do it.
Yeah. And it's funny because part of what we're saying here is kind of the myth making that comes with the Disneyland Railroad itself, right? Because while on it, the narrator says, the steam train was so important to the development of America because, it reduced a trip that used to take months to a couple of days. You could be across the country very, very quickly comparatively. The Transcontinental Railroad really kind of brought the East and West coasts together in a way that was unprecedented in speed, in comfort, in accessibility. And its continued expansion from that point is part of what makes the United States as it is today a possibility. So really, trains and steam power in general, especially for Americans and especially for a certain period in American history, were symbols of expansion, right? These iron horses that could work tirelessly to transport people and things as far as you needed to move them, and very, very quickly. And it's a really, really American symbol because America was kind of the cradle of this technological innovation. And the way that it connected everything still continues to leave huge marks on our city planning. What cities are major often coincides with where the railroad ended up. And it's just this thing that is an unmistakable piece of Americana. And it's connection to Disney, and his love for that aesthetic and for that storytelling style, is unmistakable.
But it doesn't come without its complications.
Of course not.
Because the era of expansion and this, an industrial revolution, let's pull the whole, well, it's pre-industrial revolution, but let's pull the country together with this manifest destiny, comes with a big history of genocide, of taking advantage of people and land and slavery and all of these, these horrible things that Disneyland and Disney himself even chooses to ignore. It's romanticizing this time period and this aesthetic and this idea of the great frontier and the big sky plains America, this and Frontierland captures that aesthetic as well. This romantic idea of cowboys and covered wagons and all of that, but it's not a clean history of America like Disney would have you think.
No, and in that way, I think the train, and to a lesser extent, other parts of Disneyland, including Main Street USA and Adventureland, with its very, very colonialist kind of aesthetic, is very 1955,
Yes.
and continues to be problematic in a lot of ways. And riding the steam train, uh, and hearing the narration say, like, it really is an American classic, and it brought the country together, does come with its own sense of discomfort, especially for adults and older kids who have kind of started to learn about this stuff. And the I guess the illusion is kind of tarnished by that. And that's
But
really interesting because this train is so beloved and iconic and almost childish in its inclusion. It really feels like an extension of Walt's train set over anything else, right? It's kind of
right,
this
over this
uh
land that he has perfect control over, and this like little model set that we get to play in, where there is no terrible, horrible atrocities, and there's no war, and there's no anything. It's just joy and play.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to kind of take this idea of the train as kind of one of Walt's big toys, and then to kind of say, oh yeah, that was what Disneyland was all about. It was one big toy or one big playset, maybe. And the myth making that went with that coincided with the movies and TV that were being made by Disney at the time, and still continues to feed back into the Disney movies of today as well.
Exactly.
And one other thing, Alice, the train isn't the only outmoded kind of transportation in Disneyland.
It's not. There are streetcars pulled by horses that go up and down Main Street. There's a little old-timey fire engine that takes people up and down from the fire station at the beginning of Main Street down to in front of the castle at the end of the street. There's even a little like trolley car in Toontown,
The
which I guess
Jolly Trolley.
the Jolly Trolley, which is similar, I guess, to a streetcar that you might have up there in San Francisco. But not a lot of cities have streetcars.
Oh, that's true.
It's a very like old fashioned sort of vibe, and that the streetcars and the little fire engine kind of, and even that cool double decker bus that they sometimes drive around, kind of complete the Main Street USA aesthetic. So Main Street USA is modeled after Walt Disney's hometown of Marceline, Missouri, which is kind of a classic Southern little town with the cute little storefronts and everything. And it's a little like Disney's tried to capture that old style charm. And the park, even still as it runs today, hasn't given that up. It's a little bit like a museum piece almost.
Yeah, very, very nearly. And the strange thing is, one thing you didn't mention is the Mark Twain Riverboat,
Oh my
which
gosh, I
is
can't believe
one
I
of the
forgot
few,
about the riverboat.
right? It's one of the few still operating steamboats in the Western Hemisphere, I believe. And the same
Don't
thing with
at
the
him.
train.
He doesn't know.
Don't at me. I don't actually know that. And the same thing with the train. It's a rare thing to see a working, daily operating steam train. And yet here both of these things are. But something we haven't really gotten to is kind of the speed of the train. So it's the narration of the ride on the train says, it connected the West to the East. It made America possible with its speed. And you're chugging along at what, 5-ish miles an hour.
I was going to say at tops, maybe 15.
Couldn't be 15. Yeah, what I'm getting at is that the train is not fast. The Disneyland Railroad is not a thrill ride, in any extent. And it's more of a kind of a leisurely, tour, and the Grand Circle Tour title really does fit it, right? It's kind of a meandering kind of go around. You're not really trying to get anywhere so much as you're trying to see things and end up back where you were. And the presentation style is very like, here's this part of Disneyland, and if you look to your left, here's another part of Disneyland, and we're now passing through It's a Small World. And oh, if you look over there, you'll see the Cars of Autopia. And that presentational style is very like, here is a tour of Disneyland. It's at a very slow pace, very reminiscent of older times. It's kind of a joyful, luxurious, fun little tour of all the fun stuff you can do here. And this isn't really one of those fun things. I gotta say, I love the Grand Circle Tour, and I take it every time I go to Disneyland.
I took it last time I was at Disneyland.
Isn't it fantastic?
There really was no good reason for us to do it. We just decided to do it.
No, and one of my favorite things is for it to be my last thing, because I'm tired and I want to sit down, and
but you're not ready to leave the park,
right? And you just kind of want to look at everything. And the train takes a pace that's appropriate for. And of course, we haven't really talked about the Grand Canyon and Primeval World, both of which started out as World's Fair exhibits, and then were transferred to Disneyland, and they're amazing. They're this very, very 1950s kind of like diorama, almost, dark ride sections.
It's a little bit like a train, like a set piece that Disney's playing with.
Yeah, like a toy box.
Yeah.
Like a shoe box with all of his dinosaur toys inside of it. And it's very innocent in that way, but we were watching it before we recorded as research, and you were saying that it's a little scary.
Yeah, the Primeval World got real scary. It's spooky.
Well, especially at the end with all of the dying, starving dinosaurs, and then a fight on a volcano.
The T-Rex is eating the Stegosaurus, or he's trying to, and there's a big angry volcano behind them. It's very scary. And it's loud.
Those are, yeah. But those are great moments, right?
My little brother's favorite thing in the park for many years was the dinosaurs. That was all he ever wanted to do, was ride the train around over and over and over again, just so he could see the Primeval World. It's
kind of funny because I remember loving it as a kid, and then I remember forgetting where it was. Is that strange? It's kind of a weird thing where I was like, oh, here it is. Eventually, I think maybe when we were both teenagers, when we were bored one day, we rode the train all the way around.
Exactly.
And there it was, and I was like, oh my gosh.
I didn't imagine this.
Here's the dinosaurs.
It's been here this whole time.
Yeah, it was between Tomorrowland and Main Street the whole time. How could I forget?
I totally remember doing that. I had the same realization.
And that's funny because, we should probably get to the part where we talk about why is the train there from a park operations perspective? What does it do for guests? And then what story is it trying to put into that? Or rather, how is it making a story by being ridden? And I think part of it is, you're riding it because not necessarily as a form of transport, right?
Right.
You're riding it because it's a place to sit. It's a quiet ride. It's appropriate for the entire family. You take your kid on it. Your kid falls asleep. You chill out for a little while. And I think that's why you and I might have both forgotten, because it was really for babies. It was for us when we were kids. And we sort of outgrew it and wanted to do other things at Disneyland and forgot that purpose. Like, it stopped appealing to us.
Right. And it never to us served as a method of transportation. At no point did we're up in Main Street and go, oh man, we got to get all the way to Toontown. Let's hop on the train. Like,
no, because that's 10 minutes.
It's 10 minutes and it's longer if you have to wait. So why don't we just walk? And it's not a long walk.
Yeah, and
we were young and
you could easily, if the crowds are right, walk up Main Street inside of 4 minutes, and make it to Toontown in 5, 6. It's really not much.
No.
And Disneyland is not very big.
Not,
so it doesn't really necessitate a transit system.
No, it's not. They do a really good job with their spacing, cramming a lot into a really small space. Yeah, you don't need to take the train to get from one end of the park to the other. But I think another thing that it does a little bit, at least on particularly crowded days or very, very crowded mornings, it kind of clears a little traffic off the road. Not a lot. It's not meant to. But if you get, a bunch of people on this train and they're not, all over the sidewalk, then it might, kind of like real public transportation does. It gets people off the road.
It kind of clears the freeways, as it were, of Disneyland.
Yeah, but not a lot. Just a little, couple hundred people at a time. But certain times a day that could make a pretty big difference.
Yeah, for sure. So Alice, I feel like we've really kind of reached a conclusion on the Disneyland Railroad, which is that it was never really about moving people quickly, right?
Right.
But, I hear that you've prepared a little bit of research on a train of the future that moves people at incredible speeds through the sky on a single rail.
That's right, buddy. It's called the Monorail.
Fitting name.
I know. Yeah, buddy. The Monorail is similar to the Disneyland Railroad in that it is a train that runs in one direction, carries a certain number of people on a round trip tour, if you like. But it's a little different, has a little different purpose. So let's start with a little history. The monorail was opened in June of 1959, and it was Walt Disney's very specific vision for the future of public transportation. Unfortunately, he decided to debut the monorail here in Southern California, or there in Southern California, where we Californians love our cars. Especially in the 50s and 60s, cars were a really important part of American, but specifically Californian culture, and still are, really. Trains and monorails weren't part of most people's visions for the future. I think, personally, Walt was just ahead of his time. But the monorail itself is it's a very cool train. It's very sleek. It's quiet. It's a neat piece of machinery it's quieter than most public transportation systems.
Most, if not all.
Most, if not all, public transportation systems. It can hold a ton of people, and it's a smooth ride. And honestly, it's a delight to ride. It's a very cool piece of tech. I'm very into it.
It's a 1959 piece of tech that we still think is very cool.
I think it's great. And it was built to be just like a tour around the park, but it now is a major method of transportation between downtown Disney and the park. It's about a 10-minute ride, and on the way you see you get views of the park, of Disneyland and California Adventure, some really iconic views, and I think the monorail is really unique and interesting as compared to, say, the Disneyland Railroad, in that it is a extremely functional form of public transportation, and it's very effective. It's very functional, and it could have been a very useful, like, worldwide piece of technology, but for some reason it just never took off.
And
And
yeah, you see a few monorails in certain metropolitan areas. For example, I know Seattle has a monorail,
yes.
which was built modularly and was meant to be taken down eventually, but is now a permanent fixture. Uh, but the monorail is so cool because it's like uh, at a time when cars very much felt like the future. They felt like individualism. When the streetcar and the steam train felt old fashioned and of a bygone era, the monorail said, there is a place for the train in the future era. And it can look like the future, and it can smell like the future, and it can sound like the future. And it can carry like the future too. And I think that's part of what makes the monorail so cool is that it feels like it's on air.
Yeah,
And
it's
it
almost impossibly
glides.
smooth.
And you're talking about iconic Disney views, and I gotta say I've been talking about this with our special correspondent in the field, Kate Prince.
Yes, Kate Prince, the girl who lives in your home.
Yes, the special correspondent in the field that is our home. Um,
Kate,
and
Kate has so graciously shared with us a really nice story about her first time at Disneyland and her first time on the monorail. And we got her to record it, and we'd like to share that with you all, our faithful listeners.
So here is special correspondent Kate Prince about her first experience with the Disneyland monorail.
So the first time I went to Disneyland, my parents did something a little unique. I was 5. I'd always wanted to go to Disneyland, and we went for my birthday. My dad got up very early, and he waited in line the day we were going to go into the park for the first time. We kind of gotten there the day before, checked into the hotel. We're planning to go to Disneyland as it opened in the morning. And he waited in line for the monorail, and he made sure that we got on the first monorail train and sat in the very front. Now, if you haven't been on the monorail, the very front is a very small car, that little pointed nose part, and you have an amazing view, and it's just like 6 of you and the monorail conductor. At the time, it only went from the hotel to Tomorrowland, but it drove past the front of the park. So the first memory I have of Disneyland is looking out the window of the monorail and being able to see down Main Street past the opening. And there was this sense of wonder because you're in this technology that I'd never experienced before. I'd been on like the BART trains here in the Bay, but the monorail was so unique. And it just made the experience of going into Disneyland that much more magical. And I think that is what is so unique about transportation in the parks is it's not just getting people from point A to point B. It's about giving them magical moments while moving them. And I think that is what is so special. And just recently, the last time Buddy and I went to Disneyland, we got to ride the monorail and we got to ride in the front. And when we went through the front of the park, I was filled with such a sense of wonder and nostalgia and magic. It was absolutely amazing. So I think that is what transportation in the park adds to the experience, is it adds to this sense of magic and wonder.
Wow, thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful story, and I think, to imagine kind of the importance of the monorail in that way as kind of a showcase of it, literally a showcase of Disneyland and what you're about to be experiencing it. If it's your first ride in, you're looking at this place from above as you kind of zoom across it, and it's like, here's Disneyland, right? And here's this magical place that you're going to be in a couple of minutes, just a couple of minutes, take it in. And then you kind of swoop into Tomorrowland Station. So really the monorail is a symbol of progress, right?
It's a symbol of progress, and at the same time, much like Tomorrowland itself, it's a symbol of potential. It's this like it was Walt's big vision for the future of transportation, Tomorrowland and Tomorrowland itself is a symbol of this potential, what we think the future could be, what we think the future can hold for us. And while the Disneyland Railroad is a look back at our past, the monorail is a look into our future, or at least the future that Walt envisioned for us.
Yeah, kind of an idealized future where nothing was impossible, where things that were prized were things like efficiency and innovation and imagination and design as well, all kind of at once. And that the monorail really is, it is a beautiful symbol of that. When you think of it kind of as an attachment between kind of the outside world, the kind of, especially today, the kind of corporate ESPN zone, Rainforest Cafe, Starbucks, Downtown Disney, and then the kind of fantastic Disneyland, kind of a bridge between what is possible and what is. The monorail is a very it's almost mundane in how well it works, but it's got that extra touch, that thing that makes it a little special, a little futuristic. And not everything, if only everything, especially our mutual rapid transit systems, had that panache, that kind of flair.
Right. Yeah.
And if only we had those things, then life would be like being at Disneyland every day.
We could finally live in Disneyland like we've always wanted to do.
Well, Alice, our time talking about Disneyland and its two transportation systems, its two trains, has come to an end. But now is our chance to kind of step it back and go back to talking about last week's episode when we discussed Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey at Universal Studios.
That's right. And we got a little bit of feedback, and I'd like to read this comment from Julie. Julie listened to our episode, and on the question of whether or not the Harry Potter ride is part of Harry Potter canon, she says, you can definitely tell that the goal of the story was to include as many recognizable elements, creatures, locations, etc. So it feels like they kind of built the story from the outside in. What I love about it is the innovation in ride tech, practical animatronics blended seamlessly with 3D. For me, the technical wizardry, combined with the nostalgia of HP, Harry Potter, makes up for the plot holes. And Julie, you are absolutely right. The technical wizardry, along with the regular wizardry, makes for a really excellent ride. And it should be noted that Julie, like us, is a former cast member of Disney. And she even mentioned in our conversation that she almost felt like a traitor, but that the Harry Potter ride is one of her all-time favorite rides ever made.
Yeah, and really on an innovation level, Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey it's so good at conveying the story that it does have, that it really does make kind of these plot holes and inconsistencies not forgivable, but it makes them less prominent.
Yes.
And the thing I appreciate the most about Julie's comment is that it really is that pun, is that technical wizardry.
I know.
Pun intended, for sure.
Julie's brilliant and amazing. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you so much, Julie. And now we've got a comment from a topic that we had a couple of weeks ago, right?
Right. I think this was 2 episodes ago.
So this is from Amy. Thank you, Amy. She says that, and this is Amy said last week that she had been on the Peter Pan ride in Disneyland Paris. Yes.
Yes.
And
she
said
didn't
that
like it.
She found it janky. Was that the word?
Something like that. It was.
She felt that it was rough, right? That it was kind of
not smooth.
Yeah, not a very smooth ride, which is weird because that's not what our memories kind of matched up with. But Amy's new comment here says that she's going to give the Peter Pan ride another shot when she goes back to Disneyland Paris in December. And I'm pretty glad to hear that, Amy. Thank you.
She also said that she was so excited to hear her comment read on air that she woke her poor boyfriend up in excitement. So sorry, Amy's boyfriend. It's about to happen again.
Thank you, Amy. Sorry, Amy's boyfriend. You know, we do what we can. So Amy's boyfriend, if you want to drop us a line, you can scream and wake Amy up.
Oh, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, there you go. And now I'd like to take us to a couple of Twitter shout-outs, some people on Twitter that we're interacting with and having cool conversations with.
That's right. We want to give a Twitter shout-out to somebody named Caps for Sale, which is at Caps for Sale on Twitter.
Yeah, so I asked Caps for Sale, or really I just kind of asked the Twitterverse, Diz Twitter, as it were, you know, what is their favorite transportation system at Disneyland? And Caps just sent me a GIF of the Disneyland Railroad, which I really appreciated. And then afterwards he said that, you know, we were kind of talking back and forth about how it's not really efficient, right? The Disneyland Railroad, to go anywhere that you want to go, is at least 10 minutes. And he said yes, but he always prefers the scenic route over the efficiency of walking.
That's a good point.
Yeah, which kind of brings us back to, you know, the Disneyland Railroad is not really about moving you. It's about showing you. It's completely separate, I think, from the thing that it symbolizes, which was about movement and about motion and speed. This is different. This is a leisure train. And I completely agree with Caps. That's what, for me, the train is all about.
Right. So thank you, Caps. On the complete opposite note, Natasha, longtime friend of the show, Natasha, says that she just walks.
and she sent us a great gif of Timon shaking his head. And yeah, Natasha, I'm with you too. Like when you want to get there,
you get there.
When you want to get there, you just go. There's no, well, if I catch the train now and I can beat the 3:00 parade and then I can avoid the rush hour. No, it's none of that. It's just like, all right, here we go. I got to get to Space Mountain now.
Time to walk. So that's a very good point. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you, Natasha. And we've got some kind of non sequitur Twitter shout outs this week. So I'd like to say thank you to Joshua L. Harris, aka JLH Omni on Twitter, who was talking to me about the Haunted Mansion. And this is an exact quote. Haunted Mansion is like the Citizen Kane of rides, he said. And I really like that quote. I never imagined thinking of kind of ranking the rides based on their influence and based on their effectiveness.
No, that is a really, really cool point.
Isn't it? And you know, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, oh yeah, you know, the Haunted Mansion is innovative in its effects, just like Citizen Kane was. It's atmospheric, just like Citizen Kane was. It has a novel structure, just like Citizen Kane did. And there's really no reason for the Haunted Mansion to be the way it is, to be as in-depth and interesting as it is, other than, well, that's the right way to do it.
Other than the fact that it exists, like there's really, it's not there to promote anything or be an IP of anything. It's just there to tell a story and be a good ride.
And it does that perfectly. So is the Haunted Mansion the Citizen Kane of rides? You know what? Probably.
I'm going to go ahead and say yes.
I agree 100%. JLH Omni. I think you got it right.
Next shout out, we're going to talk just super, super quick. Because this was a cool article. Dan of the Tomorrow Society posted an article on the use of intellectual property in the parks, which is a favorite pet topic of ours, apparently. He says that despite the increased focus on intellectual property in recent years, Disney has still created incredible spaces while following that mission. And the perfect example is Pandora, which transcends the confines of its source material and transforms the Avatar film into something greater. that area's success reminds us how good theme parks can be. These inviting, beautiful spaces are more than just escapist worlds, too. The best examples help to enhance our daily lives beyond the parks. And while neither of us have had a chance to make it out to Disney World or to Pandora yet, I'm going in May, and I didn't like the movie Avatar all that much, but I am very excited to check out Pandora.
I remember liking the Avatar movie for about a minute in 2009 when it was like a mind-blowing special effects kind of experience, right? This new era of 3D movies. And when Disney announced that this property that is now almost 10 years old and has sequels